Pitch Talks, brought to you by NorthStar Bets. That's a win.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. Come on in, make yourself comfortable. It is time once again for the Pitch Talks podcast. I am your boy, Andrew Zuber from the Parleh, joined by my co-host, live and in person.
Yeah, first time.
Feels really good to be back in the same room with, from NorthStar Bets, Nick Ashbourne. Nick, how you feeling this week?
Good. I mean, I think that how I feel is pretty different than how most Blue Jays fans are feeling right now. Personally, things are going good, but for the Blue Jays, it's a bit of a dark time, right? A couple losses to the Orioles, the rain out preventing kind of salvaging some momentum there. Other teams creeping up.
Yeah.
You know, the Rays. I don't really put the Orioles in that bracket, even though they are there sort of in a win-loss perspective. I still think they have a garbage 5 rotation. Don't think it's going to happen. But, you know, the Rays, the Mariners, the Blue Jays, sort of the assumption, I think, was that they were going to be not winning the division, but hosting a wild card series.
For sure.
And that assumption is coming under some serious threat.
Yeah, these aren't your 1 year older brothers Orioles like they were. I can agree. I think a lot of Jays fans, you're looking at the Orioles, you spent a lot of the part of the beginning of the year looking up at the Yankees and be like, they haven't played anybody, and now it's the Jays' turn to play the Orioles. Not going so hot. Of course, they are on a heater. They have been playing their best, but last time we talked, we were approaching the trade deadline. Now we are a week and a half post-trade deadline. I don't want to say a lot made about the Jays' action or inaction, the moves they did sort of make. I know generally how I think Jays fans in general feel about it. As somebody who is, Nick, renowned for your reasoned, unique takes on the situation, how did you feel taking a look at the Blue Jays deadline going into it and then sort of how it came out at the end?
Well, there's two parts. I mean, the first part is the Juan Soto part.
Sure.
That was never going to happen.
It's a daydream.
That was never going to happen. If you look at the package that the Padres gave up, the Blue Jays don't have those players.
For sure.
They don't. Like, Gabriel Moreno is the top chip they had to cash. And the Nationals already have a really good young catcher. It wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
What they did do, I think, was sort of fine. Like, you know, Mitch White is someone who gives you a little bit of the back rotation depth. You can use him on the bullpen. Like, it is funny that just keep coming to the Dodgers to get swingmen.
Yeah.
I think in an ideal world, they'd hope that, you know, the Trent Thorntons, the Anthony Kays, the Thomas Hatch of the world would be that player.
For sure.
And then you don't have to go and spend prospects on it. So in that case, it's kind of unfortunate for them. But I think White's a decent pitcher. The two guys from the Miami bullpen, you know, Anthony Bass, he's not the same guy. I think it's easy to say, oh, we had him in 2020. He was kind of mediocre. Why are you getting that pitcher?
A lot of that.
But guys change a lot, especially pitchers, more so than hitters. And, like, if you look at how he's using his pitches, like, he's a huge slider first guy in a way that he never used to be. That's his best pitch. I know early impressions with the Blue Jays, he's been, again, sort of fine. So it's easy to buy into that narrative, like, oh, this guy is a depth addition, but I think he's more than that. Pop is a guy with a lot of potential. Like, you have him for many years. Mm-hmm. He's got the heavy sinker. They can maybe get him to throw a slider a little bit more. They're already doing that. Good Canadian kid.
Yes.
So that's always a bonus.
In the house.
Whit Merrifield, more beneficial than maybe you realized with Springer out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. I think the total package is kind of fun. You get upgrades, but every single player they got was a player with control beyond this year. And that showed me that they think of this as a more expansive window as opposed to a specific 2022 opportunity. And if I'm a Blue Jays fan, I understand feeling upset about that. You have a good team. You have a team that could do some damage in the playoffs potentially. And you want to see your front office say, oh, this is a year that we think is a big deal. And they did not do that.
Yeah, I sort of have two warring mindsets in here. I agree with you that it feels like every trade was a win. They didn't give up a ton of capital, and they didn't, nothing like, oh, I can't believe they overpaid for that guy, but they also didn't push the chips in. And I think beyond just not disappointment, a little bit of a reality check for me personally of, like, outside of Moreno and maybe Ricky Tiedemann and maybe Elvis Martinez, who is performing with power as an underager in Double-A, I don't know who the prospects were supposed to be that they were going to go in with. It's easy to go, oh, they should go all in, but when you trade your first-round pick for Barrios, when you trade your first-round pick for Matt Chapman, when you trade, basically your previous war chest, because they had a very good system. Yeah. A lot of those guys are either in the majors with Manoah, Bo, Vlad, BGO even, Danny Jansen even, a former top prospect guy. When those guys graduate up, the quality of the farm system goes down, and especially when you're pushing all in, you're getting rid of Austin Martin, you're getting rid of Gunnar Hoagland. You're sort of already made those big pushing deals. If you had made the Matt Chapman deal at the deadline, maybe we're going, oh wow, but Also, it does feel a little bit short. You would love a swing and miss guy out of the bullpen. I just sort of came away from like, who are they supposed to trade for the swing and miss guy? They're not going to take away from the main roster, and they don't have, you look at updated prospect rankings, they're probably in the lower third of the league or right on that bubble, 19th, 21st, depending on where you read. So that was a bit of a wake-up call for me as well. I want to look into some of the targets. We talked last time, Sarah's about who they may be targeting. We had talked, are they going to be top of the market? You saw Castillo go. You saw Frankie Montes. We had heard near the deadline that they were in talks with the Angels about Syndergaard. Is there anybody that you saw go off the board for a certain price that you thought maybe they would be a little closer to that?
Yeah, I mean, those big pitchers, again, it's hard to do. You got to cash Moreno. Like, if you want that big top target, you have to cash that chip. They weren't willing to do it yet. And you could make an argument that they should. You can make an argument that he hasn't shown the power that maybe you'd like.
Yeah.
There's a case to be made that they should have done that. But they didn't want to, so we put that aside for a second. The guy that I think was in their price range that I saw the deal and I was like, this is a good deal for the Blue Jays, is a little bit of a complicated one. It's Jorge Lopez of the Baltimore Orioles. There's your swing and miss bullpen guy. He's got some control. He's really a breakout guy this year. The rest of his career has been pretty mediocre, but he's clearly dealing now. And the Twins went and got him for a package that was not impressive. Now, if you're the Blue Jays, maybe you have to pay more because you're in the division. It's a complicating factor. But when I looked at like all the deals laid out and thought what was there potentially for the Blue Jays, I think the Orioles, even as they come along, they're still not at the point where they can turn their nose up and say, we're fighting for this division, we'll never do this. I think if you came to them with a good package, that player might have been there for you.
Yeah, and there was a lot of talk, I remember before deadline, about some of the Detroit relievers not moving off some of them. May have been the last thing Al Avila did or didn't do. We're sort of in that position. We'll talk about that a little later on with our guest, Mike Petriello, of MLB.com and StatCast. You're going to join us in a few minutes here, but sort of just continuing to focus on the Blue Jays. As we said off the top, a lot of concern going around right now. The meltdowns are nightly. Losing 2 to the Orioles will do that to you. Lots of different things to pick from. Obviously, you mentioned the swing and miss. You mentioned the bullpen. The end of the rotation, Kikuchi, Barrios' question marks. There's a lot of different directions you can sort of direct your biggest concern. I know what mine is. I'm going to hold my cards for a minute. Is it the bullpen? Is it George Springer? Is it the rotation? When you look at this and you see where they are, 10 games over 500 in the top wildcard spot, better than they had been recently, but not trending in the way we all want them to. If you're a fan, what's your biggest concern right now if you're watching this team?
I think it's going to be George Springer. A lot of people are going to quote those stats of like what the record is when Springer's in the lineup and what it is when it isn't. And obviously that's an oversimplification. We know that one player only has so much effect. I refer you to Mike Trout's entire career. That being said, he is a clear leadoff guy for them, which is something they don't really have. When he's healthy, when he's at the height of his powers, he really can be a top 10, top 15 hitter in MLB. Now, the reason that we haven't seen that necessarily with the Blue Jays at times is because he's played hurt a lot. And I think what's going to happen is he's going to come back. And the question is he coming back healthy? Is this rest benefiting him? Or is he coming back to play as a shell of himself? And that's what he did at the end of 2021. We remember how amazing he was, June, July, August, in sort of the middle of 2021 when the team was starting to turn that season around. And at the end of it, he just was not good down the stretch, and you're going to put him leadoff too. So then he's kind of a hole in the lineup. Again, I don't want to forecast necessarily that's going to be the case, but I'm worried about that as an outcome for the Blue Jays because Springer is a tough guy, and he's willing to play hurt, but when he plays hurt, he's just not himself. Yeah,
you mentioned him as a leadoff hitter. One of the most dangerous leadoff hitters to ever play in MLB, up there with, it's Ricky Henderson, and then it's George Springer, and sort of that level of guy in terms of power and on-base percentage and sort of that whole package of a dangerous hitter. I do agree. I think it is Springer. I think when you look at the version of the Jays that you want to be a contender, George Springer hits first in that lineup. George Springer plays center field in that lineup. We know the corner outfield has its strengths and weaknesses. One of the strengths is comedic effect. One of the weaknesses is roots of the ball. So it goes. George papers over a lot of those problems with his ability to get into the gaps, his arm, and just sort of that level of calm I think he brings out there. Whit Merrifield is the replacement for now. I think the less we see of Raimel Tapia in center field, the better. You don't want to go below that. I guess maybe Zimmer, but you're really dropping off them with the hitting.
Jackie Bradley Jr.
Jackie Bradley
now,
Jr., pardon me.
They
Look at
have
that.
no shortage of options, but there's a difference between having options and having good options.
Absolutely. And we've seen in the lineup lately, Lourdes Scribbiello is having a great year, hitting very well. Sort of everything is up except for the power. But you really don't want him hitting leadoff. He's a guy that if you're having him in the 5-6, then you really have length in your lineup, especially when the catchers are hitting. You really got some length. When he's at the top, Vlad and Bo are going to be the drivers, and Teoscar has really come into form, but you sort of then the bottom half is not nearly as threatening as it is when you're able to put Gurriel, Chapman, who's on the heater. You're sort of able to really build out a full lineup. I think Springer at the top, Springer in center field is sort of the glue to this whole thing, and they feel a little bit less than the sum of their parts when he is not a part of that. So for me, that is the big concern. Although, listen, the bullpen
not great.
That's what bullpens are. I'm sort of of the opinion like bullpens are for guys who aren't that great pitchers. But we've seen usage in playoffs change a little bit. Swing and miss has been the term of the year. It got into the lexicon and it will not go away. But you gave a review of the players. Is there a shining light? Do you think maybe we've heard about Zulueta maybe coming up and being a surprise? Is there a positive spin you can throw on this, or perhaps a classic bucket of cold water to even throw on those?
The old negative Nick. I do think that the bullpen is an area that you can potentially, it's not a guarantee, but you can potentially improve as the season goes on, whereas that's not like you can't make Springer any more healthy than he's going to be. I'm sure he's going to do all his treatments. The rotation, you're not going to find another starter at this point. They don't, trust me, they do not have a guy AAA.
They tried.
They don't have anyone like Casey Lawrence is not the answer. But the bullpen, you mentioned Zulueta. He's an arm I'm really interested in. There's the theoretical concept that is Nate Pearson. Like, I do believe when he's healthy, he can make an impact in the bullpen. I don't know what % chance that's going to happen. 18% seems high.
I'm
the first number
not
off the top
doing
of my head.
that again. I'm not doing Nate Pearson as the answer
There
again.
are some guys that you could envision bringing up and catching lightning in a bottle with. That's just not going to happen in any of the other phases of the game. Again, like, even when that happens, is this going to be a top-end bullpen? No, but you hope it's a middle of the road bullpen, and we've seen teams with middle of road bullpens win. Like you think back to the Braves last year. Was the bullpen the best part about that team? Not necessarily.
Yeah.
You think about the 2019 Washington Nationals, like they were going out and getting Daniel Hudson at the deadline.
Right. Yeah.
Like they had bullpen issues forever, despite being a really good team. So I think there is a sense that if you don't have this elite lockdown bullpen, you cannot win in the playoffs, and that's not necessarily true.
Just and then we sort of very quick on the Jays. Some of the teams behind them, we're going to talk about the Orioles a little bit more in depth and the Yankees a little bit more in depth with our guest. Team that surprised me with a lot of action was Seattle. Where do you sort of land on the Mariners right now and what they've done?
It's impressive. If you told me coming into the season Seattle was going to be this much in the mix, I would have been really surprised. Like, I know they added Robbie Ray, who actually hasn't been 2021 Robbie Ray, but Julio Rodriguez has just hit the ground running. He's a stud. He's an absolute star immediately. Luis Castillo is a great ad. Like, they're a true threat to the Blue Jays in this spot. And again, the home field makes a huge difference in these wild card series. If I'm the Blue Jays, that's probably the team I'm most worried about, more so even than the Rays. We know the Rays find a way. That is what they are, but they have so many injuries. And the Mariners are a little bit more of a complete team right now. But like you said, we're going to discuss that with our guest, who is Mike Petriello of MLB.com, a guy who does a lot of work with StatCast advanced numbers, and we're going to get some of his insight now. We are now joined by Mike Petriello of MLB.com, formerly Fangraphs, ESPN, longtime writer and analyst, kind of the public face of StatCast right now. If there's something new that's coming out at Baseball Savant, a new statistic, a cool new way to measure what people are doing on the field, there's a good chance you're hearing about it from Mike. So, Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
As of recording, sort of the big story in baseball is the departure of Al Avila, a longtime executive with the Detroit Tigers. I think coming into this season, people felt like the Tigers were maybe moving in the right direction, a couple of high-profile young players. And yet, this year's been, nothing short of a disaster in Detroit. Mike, where do you see this rebuild going right now? And if you're a Tigers fan, how should you feel?
Well, I think if you're a Tigers fan, you should feel conflicted, right? Like, you should feel happy. I think that they made the change that I think a lot of fans wanted to come, and maybe disappointed that it got to the point where a change was necessary. Because you look at what's happening here, there's still talent. Like, there's still a lot of high draft picks. Like, Riley Green, I think, is going to be a star. But I would feel a little concerned about, Spencer Torkelson really did not look very good when he was in the majors. Matt Manning has never really had a track record of results to match his pedigree. Casey Mize has had injury problems. Like, I don't necessarily think this is a quick turnaround. And I think the decision they make for who's going to come in and do this next is going to have a lot to say about where they're going, because they were kind of an older school team. And it's going to be really interesting to see what direction they try to go from here.
Mike, focusing on a little bit on the AL East, we are obviously here in Canada. We do have a little bit of Jays focus. There's been some sort of shuffling of the story in the AL East. Which of the two things that are happening right now are you a little bit more of a believer in? Is it the Yankees sort of coming back down to earth, or is it this Orioles push, this Orioles magic that we're seeing again here in the midpoint of the season as they push up in the standings? Which one of those things do you think is a little bit more real, we'll say?
That's a good question. I think I believe both of them to some extent. I guess the realer thing is that the Yankees were never going to keep playing as well as they had. For like 2 months, they were on pace to win 125 games or something like that. So was that ever going to happen? No. And obviously they've had some injuries, especially in the bullpen. So if I have to pick one, I guess I'm saying the Yankees, but I'm kind of in on the Orioles. Like, I'm writing about them right now because I think, the way they've gotten here hasn't really been a good look necessarily, in the sense that they weren't trying super hard to win the last couple of years. But I do think people underestimate how much of an expansion team it was when the new front office took over. Because you remember the last year under Dan Duquette, they lost 115 games. They traded Manny Machado for not very much at all. They'd ignored international scouting for a bunch of years. So I do think you have to look at it from that perspective of, this team was so far away when they brought in their new front office. And it didn't have to be this painful, I think, to get here, but I really like what they're doing, and there's more talent that hasn't even come up yet. So it's not for me necessarily about, are they going to get to the playoffs this year? It's, are they building something real for the future? And I think they are.
Yeah, I think a lot of Blue Jays fans in particular were kind of the mind that the Orioles were something to worry about in, 2024, 2025, potentially never. And that certainly hasn't been the case recently. One Blue Jays angle I did want to explore with you, and one of the reasons we wanted to have you on the podcast today, was a piece you recently wrote about contenders and how they've improved their infield defense. And the Blue Jays were on that list, but a bit of a surprise was Matt Chapman. And he's someone that's been sold as, one of the very best defenders in the league at literally any position. Like, there was famously a guy who got a tattoo of Matt Chapman 27 DRS or whatever it was in Oakland when he was there. And we haven't seen that in terms of the numbers. I think if you ask Blue Jays fans, they'll say that Chapman has made a lot of good plays, and we've seen the ceiling of that, but the metrics don't bear it out. And even he has said, sort of his first half of the season, he's really disappointed with his defense. And you drilled down on that a little bit. So I was wondering, first, what you found, and then secondly, what you think the prognosis for him is, going into his late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, I found that he had been about average as a defender. So 0 outs above average after a couple of years where he'd been elite, like essentially Nolan Arenado. And I tweeted about that the other day. And like, after I did that, I think half of Toronto media reached out to me being like, what? Matt Chapman? No, Matt Chapman's great. The eye test, is wonderful. And I'm like, okay, well, metrics can be fallible. I'm not saying that they are 100% concrete and perfect, but now I'm interested to know why. And the first thing I do when there's a kind of confusing case like that is maybe go check out defensive run saved just as a smell test. And they kind of said the exact same thing. So I was like, well, that's interesting. And if you don't want to believe that number, that's fine. But no one had a problem with it when they rated him as elite, so you can't just like pick the numbers that back up what you already believe. And I wanted to know what it was. So what I did was I went into our internal system here and I found like the top 12 or 15 plays that he didn't make that were, ordered by should have been made, more or less. And when I was watching them, I realized there were very few plays where he wasn't getting to the ball or not fielding the ball cleanly. And they were all about trying to make the throw or transfer the throw. And so I shared some of those videos, right, where Bobby Witt is running and Chapman takes like a year to get the throw off, or he does a great job catching like an Aaron Judge smash, fields it cleanly, and then can't even get the ball out of his glove. I don't know that that's necessarily predictive of anything. I don't have a good reason as to why that might be. But that was pretty clearly what was going on here as far as what the metrics saw. And then when I split it up, the outs above average into, the range factor of it and the completing the play factor of it, the range factor has not changed much at all. Because I know people were talking about, he'd hurt his hip in Oakland. That doesn't seem to be affecting him. It was almost entirely about the completing the play, throwing the ball. He's still got a strong throwing arm. So why is this happening? I have absolutely no idea. But that's why the metrics say that. And having looked into it that way, I'm like, okay, I get it now. I understand what's going on.
just the visual I get when you talk about the data room or the data, I'm picturing like the Minority Report where you're just like surrounded by Matt Chapman defensive content and you're sort of sorting through it. I know it's not like that, but one of the new toys in that data dump, in that massive amount of data that you guys have there with the StatCast stuff, has been the bat tracking data. That's something new. Always trying to sort of unlock the mysteries of the way that sort of this game works and the little details and the little angles and the game of inches. What have you learned digging into some of that bat tracking data? And do you have an idea when some of that might become public?
Yeah, it was a little unusual of us to kind of dig into it that quickly because at the time I was doing it, still currently, it's not in all 30 parks. I don't even have access to it in all 30 parks because it's just not there. It was only in Houston and only in Dodger Stadium and only since mid-May. So I did this like right before the All-Star game. So it was basically just guys who had come through those two parks in those 2 months. So I don't think we'd seen the Red Sox. I don't think we'd seen the Blue Jays. So like that's the first thing to know is that it's limited to just guys who happen to play in those parks in those 2 months. So I was a little, uncertain about whether there would be enough signal to cut through it. And then when I started putting leaderboards together and it was like, okay, Julio Rodriguez is great and Jazz Chisholm is great. And, Yordan Alvarez is up there. And then at the bottom, it's like Leori Garcia and Stephen Kwan. It's like, okay, maybe there's some signal here. And I think it's cool because, we know so much about how the ball moves, right? How pitches move, how batted balls move, how the outfielders move. We don't know that much about how the bat moves, at least in an in-game context. Like obviously, you can go to Driveline or labs like that, but in an in-game context, we just don't have that much. And once we saw that, there really is some signal to this, that's cool. The next step is, and I don't have the answer to this right this second, will this be implemented in all 30 parks? I hope so. I'd like to think so. And then once it is, we'll kind of go from there and see what we can put out on the website. But I think it's pretty interesting. And a lot of people reached out and said, this is so cool. We're excited you can finally do this. And it could kind of be like the next big step here.
It is exciting for sure.
Yeah. It's possible the answer to this question is literally what you just said. But think about how you have access to all this data. What's the thing you see in the game where you wish you had data about that? Like you talked about how the bat moves and like swing speed and things like that. Like you said, it's in its infancy. Is there something, maybe it's that, maybe it's something else that stands out? You're like, oh, I wish I had numbers on this to help my player evaluations.
Well, it would have been that beforehand, but I think it'd be interesting to have like minute by minute weather data. Right now, weather is just kind of at the start of the game and it might not even be in the ballpark. And I actually think that is kind of on the agenda to improve in the next couple of years. You've probably seen some animations of it in like San Francisco or Oakland or wherever they have it, but I think that's cool because I think that could really help, explain how some batted balls move in a way where you're like, well, it was windy at the beginning of the game and now it's 3.5 hours later and it's not. Like, I think that'd be really interesting.
The public availability of the StatCast data, first of all, it's incredible. But second of all, I think it sort of has changed the way that people talk about the game in real time, especially you see on Twitter. You will see people using StatCast, in the press box or when they're watching at home, they have it up. They're giving out, exit velocities or pitcher velocities or launch angles. I know my personal one that I see that always makes me sort of scratch my head a little bit is XBA, because sometimes there's some data that does and doesn't go into it that can sort of, make that, I don't want to say fudged, but sort of misrepresented. Is there a stat that you see that gets misrepresented the most on Twitter or in articles or people that are using StatCast data that you think maybe just people aren't quite using it the way that you guys intended?
I think some of the expected stats are very powerful when they're used properly, but I do think people tend to take them as 100%. If you're underperforming it, it's unlucky, which in some cases that is true. Chapman's probably a good example of that because he was smashing the ball for 2 months and getting no results out of it, and now he's been fantastic at the plate lately. But I do think it's a little too easy to say, oh, well, he's 100% unlucky because he's underperforming. And it's like, well, that's not always the case. Like there's more that goes into it than that. So I think those can maybe be a little bit overused, but I think when used properly, there's a lot of power behind them.
Mike, one of the things that, as someone, like I said before, you're kind of the face of StatCast and Baseball Savant. And so you kind of get positioned from a branding perspective, maybe as this guy whose enjoyment of baseball comes from the numbers, and that may or may not be true in all cases. I was wondering if there's a player that you see through the Baseball Savant data, through that prism, who's totally unimpressive, but you personally love to watch. Because that's something I find sometimes, like this player is sort of objectively bad, But I really enjoy what Raimel Tapia for the Blue Jays is a guy who's kind of like that for me sometimes, like the reckless abandon, the speed that's not actually that fast, but like looks fast on TV. I was wondering if you have any guys or a particular player stands out in that realm.
Well, that's a tough question because I feel like any guy I would say about that, he may not have like a great, wins above replacement or overall record or anything like that, but there's probably like one interesting number I would be able to pull about him, say like, well, he's not that good, but he's runs super fast. So I'd like to say I had a good answer to that, but I'm not sure I actually do.
Very diplomatic of you, for sure. I'm always interested in the reliever or the pitcher who doesn't have outstanding anything, but manages to get out somehow, and sort of nobody can really explain it.
They just call it deception. It's
yes.
Like, oh yeah, this is deception. We don't know what it is, so it must be deception.
I wanted to, I had mentioned the way people talk about the game on Twitter. Every so often, something will come up that is sort of universally. It's just the joy of baseball, and everyone sort of gets their enjoyment out of it. This week, it was the Edwin Diaz entrance, the trumpets, the amazing song. Not to put you too much on the spot, but if Mike, you were the closer, favorite team is going to the pen. We're bringing in Mike Petriello. What entrance, you can add the flames, you can add the lighting, you can add the music. How do you want the intimidation? Here comes the pistol, Mike Petriello, or whatever the nickname may be. What's your dream closer entrance for yourself?
Oh man, I'd probably go with something obnoxious. Maybe something to like, I don't know, some like really obnoxious 1990s ska song or something like that to really throw everybody off. Or like go the exact opposite direction and say like, okay, Mariano, you're coming into Metallica, that's fine, but here's something that's like 40 times more metal. Just to like completely blow the house down. You got to have extremes here. I don't want like middle of the road music.
Nobody wants to hit after hearing ska. That is like 100%.
No one wants to be there. Yeah, I think you got to go to one side or the other. Whether it's extremely metal or just like, I don't know, Katy Perry, one or the other.
You want to melt a face.
Don't want to be in the middle. Mike, we really appreciate you coming onto the podcast, giving us insight on things as goofy as that and things as in the weeds as some of the backtracking stuff. We love the insight you provide.
Thanks, guys. Anytime.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. And we're going to check out the run line and some interesting numbers that we're mulling over as the year winds down.
Yeah, last week or last show, we talked a little bit about Cy Young futures. I want to bring in World Series futures right now because in the wake of the deadline, the teams are more or less solidified. Now, there's injuries that can happen, things that can change. I want to go through some of the things that might be of interest to you. Personally, I have kind of fairly strong philosophy on this. With the current setup of the MLB playoffs, which has changed this year, I really don't want to bet on teams I don't think are getting a bye.
Right.
I just think that the 3-game wildcard series is such a variable. It can go in so many directions, no matter how good you are. Like, take the San Diego Padres. They got Juan Soto. They're incredible. That's fine. But I don't want to bet on them because, like, against any team, anything can happen in a 3-game series. So the team I like right now is Houston. They're third in the odds. They're going to cruise into that bye. There's absolutely no sandpaper for them for the rest of the season. Yordan Alvarez has been at times the best hitter in baseball, a little bit behind Judge right now, just the home run streak. They've got a great rotation, enough that they were trading out of starters at the deadline. You don't see that very often.
Seriously.
They're at plus 415 right now. That isn't the longest odds you're going to see, but for a team that has a bye, has the luxury of resting players down the stretch, continually goes to the ALCS like every single year. They're making it that far. A lot of people thought Carlos Correa leaving was going to be a huge deal for them. I mean, Correa hasn't been that great in Minnesota, and Jeremy Pena has been good. Justin Verlander, his return has been a massive boon to this team. That's a team I like. And then on the other side of it, basically the philosophy I just espoused, I'm fading teams that I know are going to be in the wild card round. And right now, I think the Mets are pulling away from the Braves in the NL East. And at plus 1,200, that's just not enough to entice me into, the chaos that comes with that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Mets. I do like the Mets plus 500. I just sort of like the pitching in October is so important. We just talked about the bullpens at the beginning of the show with the Blue Jays. I like the bullpen. I like the rotation. I think Francisco Lindor is sort of back to where we expected after a bit of a down year with the first year of the contract. I'm in on the Mets. Unless there's a curse that I'm not made aware of. I'm going to go with the Mets.
There's sort of a general, it's not a specific
Metsiness.
curse, it's
Call
like
it Metsiness.
a malaise that surrounds the Mets.
So I like the Mets at plus 500. I'm going to fade. We're going to stick in New York. I'm going to fade the Yankees at plus 400. This is a classic clip that will get played when the Yankees win the World Series, and I can look like an idiot. This is pure vibes. I think the vibes are off in New York. I think the honeymoon period is over with a lot of these guys. I love to follow New York media. It's just a sickness I have. I think everything is so life or death that I cannot get enough of it. So maybe the recent, mediocre play is bleeding into my pick here, but I just think they may have already had the best part of their year. And I am wary of that as well, sort of to your point about the wild card. I'm always wary of a team that hasn't had to put the pedal down for a long time. And I don't see a lot of, with the way the wild card is going and the way the AL East is sort of, the Jays and the Orioles and the Rays all sort of like crammed up. The Yankees really, even in this run, haven't had a lot to worry about other than just sort of like internally feeling mediocre. I like that to sort of be a barrier and a barometer of like some trouble could be on the horizon here, and they could go into September with not a lot to play for, and just hoping guys don't get hurt shouldn't be. It's not a great sign for me, as well as it is a great sign that you're locked it up. I just think it's pure vibes. I can get excuses.
Just admit it's pure vibes. That's fine.
It's pure vibes.
I don't disagree with anything you've said there. What is funny to me is that you're fading the Yankees and betting on the Mets. Like, historically speaking, that is a horrible strategy. But in this particular case, in 2022, I don't think it's a bad one.
I watched the Cubs and the White Sox and the Red Sox win World Series in my lifetime. Vibes are all over the world. Update, you mentioned we talked about the Cy Young last episode. We talked about the Jays, still some long shots, Manoah and Gausman. If you're curious, Gausman plus 5,000.
And he's pitched better since then. A couple of shutout outings. Again, I think his stuff is sort of fielding, independent related. I don't think that resonates with voters. But for a, $3 dart throw on Kevin Gausman, it wouldn't. If he had that Robbie Ray end to the year last year, it's still potentially in the cards. I wouldn't go with Manoah.
Quick plug. Last episode, Saris did say he has Gausman at or near the top of his list in terms of stuff and pitching overall quality. But at the end of that segment last time, I did mention Justin Verlander, who was in third place at the time at plus 250. He has moved into the favorite over the last 2 weeks. McClanahan, Dylan Cease, your number 2. He's now minus 162 on NorthStar bets. So if you had been in at plus 250, you're feeling good right now.
You were riding the Zoobs wave. You're in a good spot.
It's vibes.
The combination of the low ERA, again, resonating with all types of voters. The sort of age and sentimentality thing, the Hall of Fame, resume building, all that jazz. Dylan Cease still very much in the mix, maybe more so on the advanced statistics side, the strikeout side. With Verlander, too, my worry is that he's got that big gap between the ERA and the xERA.
Sure.
Not always a perfect indication. To be honest, Cy Young contenders probably self-select because they've been so effective for guys who are outperforming their stats. But there is a part of me that thinks Verlander doesn't strike out a lot of guys at this point in his career. There could be that start where he just gives up 4 bleeders in a row and then a grand slam, and he's out in 3 innings. Doesn't usually happen to him. But he gives me a little bit of worry at the current price. But if you got him at the Zoobs price, then you're sitting pretty.
I will remind, as always, it's a media award. So the narrative and story does sort of matter. Less than it used to. I think we're a little bit more into they're going to look at FIP, they're going to look at xERA. That may not be the decider, but it will be factored into the decision. Ultimately, it is the media story. That is a good look at sort of the interesting futures we're looking at. Some stuff to chew on there, I think, to take away. I'll talk about the vibes. I like to learn throughout the show and then try to apply it at the end. That's my goal.
I mean, if we get good enough guests,
that's my goal.
You can just learn from them, absorb that, and then use it.
Mike's answer about ska. I was like, well, maybe the Mets. Maybe the Mets is the ska-iest team.
I mean, the Edwin Diaz thing. If anyone hasn't seen it, somehow just look up on Twitter. Just search Edwin Diaz on Twitter. The trumpets, unbelievable. Truly something other closers can learn from.
I listen to that in my car on the way to work.
Fantastic.
That's how I pull out of my driveway every morning. That's going to do it for another episode of the Pitch Talks podcast. We appreciate you listening. If you could, leave us a review, write us some nice words, give us some stars.
All of our reviews are from the previous iteration, so we could get some fresh reviews.
It's a classic not saying, just saying.
Yeah, just saying.
It does help us out a lot. We appreciate the kind words and all of the support. Once again, I am Andrew Zuber from the Parleh, your boy at the Zoobs. Nick Ashbourne, NorthStar Bets. Check out his work, northstarbets.ca. We'll catch you next time on the Pitch Talks podcast.
Pitch Talks, brought to you by NorthStar Bets. That's a win.